I used to think budgeting didn't work for me because I just wasn't disciplined enough. That was the story I told myself. I'd sit at my kitchen table around 10 at night, laptop open, the apartment quiet in that slightly lonely way, and I'd feel this brief rush of optimism. Rent went in clean, car insurance, gas, groceries. Everything looked neat for about 15 minutes. Then I'd get to the part where real life actually lived. Eating out, random Target runs. The stuff I couldn't explain without sounding tired. I'd either lowball it or dump it into a vague category and pretend that counted as control. What I didn't notice back then was how quickly I started budgeting for a version of myself that didn't really exist, a calmer, more organized guy who didn't get worn down by Wednesday. Every time it fell apart, I blamed the numbers. It took me a while to notice the problem wasn't money. It was attention. Budgets almost always start as optimistic documents. Not lies exactly, more like hopes. I'd write grocery numbers that felt responsible instead of accurate. 300 a month sounded like an adult number, even though I'd never once hit it. Eating out got capped at 100, like I was suddenly someone who cooked every night. And the weird thing was, the first time I went over, it didn't feel like useful information. It felt like proof the whole thing was pointless. One slightly long workday, one $22 takeout order, and my brain quietly checked out. I'd stop opening the app, stop logging receipts. By the third week, I'd already be mentally planning the next better system. What I didn't want to admit then was how much relief I felt when I stopped tracking. Blaming the budget was easier than sitting with how different my actual life looked from the clean version on the screen. There's a moment that happens early on, usually faster than people admit, where one bad week quietly cancels the whole month. I remember it clearly. I'd be 10 days in, things mostly fine, and then something small would happen. A $60 dinner I didn't plan. Gas a little higher than expected. And instead of adjusting anything, I'd feel this internal shrug. Like, well, it's already off. Might as well stop paying attention. What's strange is how final that feeling was. One number out of line and suddenly the entire budget felt fake. Looking back, the money part wasn't the issue. $60 wasn't catastrophic. It was the way I treated it like a moral failure instead of information. I didn't want to look at a half-working system. I wanted something perfect or nothing at all. And nothing turned out to be much easier to live with, at least emotionally, even if it cost more. Most budgets don't account for exhaustion, not emergencies, just normal, midweek tired. The kind where cooking feels heavier than spending. I never wrote a line item for being worn down at 7:30 on a Tuesday. So when I paid $18 in delivery fees on top of a basic meal, it felt like a personal flaw instead of a predictable pattern. I'd stare at the number afterward and feel annoyed with myself, but not surprised. That was the part that bothered me later. I acted shocked every time it happened, even though it happened constantly. My budget assumed I'd have the same energy every day. Real life didn't. And instead of noticing that mismatch, I just labeled myself bad with money. It never crossed my mind that the plan itself ignored the version of me that actually existed most of the time. Another thing that quietly broke budgets for me was timing. Money doesn't leave evenly, but budgets pretend it does. Insurance hits in chunks. Car repairs don't ask permission. Birthdays cluster. I'd check my account halfway through the month and feel behind without knowing why. All the categories technically made sense, but the balance didn't match the calm story I told myself at the start. That gap created this low-level anxiety that followed me around. I'd stopped trusting the numbers because they didn't reflect how the month felt. And once trust is gone, attention goes with it. I didn't adjust for timing. I just internalized the stress. It took a while to realize I wasn't bad at budgeting. I was bad at noticing how lumpy money actually is. There was a night I finally added up all the subscriptions I barely thought about. Nothing dramatic. Streaming here, an app there, music, cloud storage. It came out to around $70 a month. I remember saying that number out loud and feeling oddly uncomfortable. 70 didn't sound terrible. But then I did the rest. That's $840 a year for things I rarely noticed. That was the moment I sat back in my chair and didn't immediately minimize it. I wanted to. My brain tried. But the number just sat there, not catastrophic, just heavy. I realized I hadn't avoided canceling them because I needed them. I avoided adding them up because I didn't want to see what quiet convenience cost over time. Budgets are supposed to be neutral, but a lot of them feel judgmental. Mine did. Every category read like a disappointed voice. Too much here. Not enough there. I'd open the app and instantly feel defensive, even though I was the one who set the numbers. It's strange to feel resentful toward your own rules, but that's exactly what happened. Instead of information, the budget felt like criticism. And criticism makes people pull away. I didn't stop spending, I stopped listening. Looking back, I can see how often I rebelled against myself just to feel some relief. Ignoring the budget wasn't about money. It was about not wanting to feel talked down to by a spreadsheet I created when I was in a better mood. I restarted my budget more times than I can remember. New app, new layout, new approach. I'd tell myself this one matched how I really lived. The first few days always felt clean, almost soothing. Restarting gave me that fresh feeling without requiring me to sit with the mess. That's the part I didn't want to look at first. Restarting feels productive, but it avoids continuity. It avoids staying with uncomfortable patterns long enough to recognize them. I wasn't changing my behavior, I was changing my interface. And every reset came with the quiet hope that this version of me would stick. When it didn't, I didn't question the cycle. I just downloaded something else. Prices don't jump, they drift. Coffee creeps from $4 to $6, gas inches up. Delivery fees add little surcharges with friendly names. My budget never kept up with that. I'd set numbers once and act surprised when the world changed. Over time, that made the whole thing feel rigged. Like no matter how carefully I planned, something kept leaking. It was exhausting to feel like I was constantly behind without making big mistakes. What I eventually noticed was how much energy it took to pretend those changes weren't happening. Ignoring drift doesn't stop it. It just turns budgeting into a constant game of catch-up you never quite win. The hardest part of budgeting was never the math. It was identity. Seeing where my money actually went forced me to see who I actually was. Not who I liked to think I was on calm weekends. The real pattern was right there. Convenience over intention. Short-term relief over long-term clarity. That realization didn't come with panic. It came with resistance. I'd close the app and feel this low-grade irritation I couldn't quite name. Part of me wanted the numbers to be wrong. Another part wanted to stop looking entirely. That tension sat quietly in the background for a long time. I didn't fix it. I just noticed how uncomfortable it felt to be seen by my own habits. I also made the mistake of comparing my budget to other people's advice. Numbers from videos, screenshots online, rent percentages that didn't apply to my city, savings goals that assumed a different paycheck. Every comparison made my own situation feel like a failure. I'd adjust my numbers downward to match what sounded responsible, even when it didn't match reality. Then I'd feel bad when I missed them. It was a quiet way of borrowing someone else's math and blaming myself when it didn't fit. Over time, that comparison stripped the budget of its usefulness. It stopped being about my life and started being about measuring up. And measuring up is exhausting when the ruler isn't built for you. Credit cards inside a budget always felt strange. The minimum payments sat there like normal bills, but nothing ever moved. Balances hovered. Interest quietly accumulated. The numbers were accounted for, but the weight didn't change. Month after month, I'd log the payment and feel nothing. No progress, no relief, just maintenance. That numbness was dangerous. It made debt feel permanent, like furniture you stopped noticing. Budgeting around it didn't reduce the stress. It just made the stress quieter. I didn't panic anymore. I just accepted it. And acceptance without movement has a way of draining energy you don't realize you're losing. Budgets rarely include emotion spending, even though that's where a lot of money actually goes. Stress buys, celebration buys, convenience buys. I treated those as exceptions instead of patterns. After a rough week, spending felt justified. After a good one, it felt deserved. Either way, it slipped past the plan. When I finally noticed how predictable those moments were, it wasn't a breakthrough. It was a dull recognition. I wasn't impulsive. I was consistent. And consistency is harder to argue with. Ignoring emotion didn't make the budget stronger. It made it fragile. One bad day and the whole thing cracked. I once added up what eating out actually cost me. Not a special month, just a normal one. 25 here, 40 there. A few lunches I didn't feel like packing. It came out to around $300. That's $3,600 a year. I didn't react right away. I just sat with it. 300 didn't feel reckless. It felt normal. That was the uncomfortable part. Nothing about my spending felt extreme, yet the yearly number carried real weight. I realized I'd been evaluating habits by how they felt, not by what they accumulated into. And feelings are terrible at estimating time. Sometimes budgets look fine on paper while savings quietly stall. Categories are green, bills are paid, but nothing builds. That was one of the most unsettling realizations for me. I wasn't in trouble, but I wasn't moving either. The budget didn't lie, it just didn't tell the whole story. Progress felt abstract, distant. Meanwhile, the day-to-day felt busy and expensive. That gap created this vague unease I couldn't quite explain. I wasn't failing, I just wasn't arriving anywhere. And that's harder to fix because there's no obvious alarm. Budgeting apps love alerts, warnings, notifications. After a while, they started to feel accusatory. Overspent, category exceeded, reminder. I'd see them pop up while I was already tired and feel instantly annoyed. Instead of adjusting, I muted them. Precision turned into pressure. The more detailed it got, the less I wanted to engage. It wasn't that the information was wrong, it was the timing. Getting nudged when you're already stretched thin doesn't feel helpful. It feels like noise. And noise is easy to ignore. Budget fatigue doesn't arrive loudly. It builds. Month after month of watching numbers without relief. No big wins. No dramatic failures. Just maintenance. I didn't wake up one day and decide to quit. I just stopped opening the app as often. Then at all. The exhaustion wasn't about money. It was about attention. Constant awareness without progress wears you down. I told myself I was taking a break. What I was really doing was avoiding a system that demanded energy I didn't have left. When people stop budgeting, they don't stop spending. That's the quiet part. Everything keeps going. Subscriptions renew. Cards swipe. Bills hit. The only thing missing is awareness. That limbo felt worse than tracking. At least tracking gave me context. Without it, money felt slippery again. Harder to hold. I didn't feel freer. I felt disconnected. But disconnection was easier than facing numbers that didn't change fast enough. I found an old budget file months later. I opened it out of curiosity, not guilt. The numbers were familiar. Too familiar. Not much had changed. That realization didn't sting the way I expected. It was calmer than that, almost neutral, like seeing a photo from a few years ago and realizing how long you've been standing in the same place. No judgment, just clarity. I didn't close it right away. I let it sit on the screen longer than usual. People talk about budgeting like it's about control. But for me, it was always about noticing. Even $5 a day is about $150 a month. That's $1,800 a year. Not dramatic, just steady. Heavy when you let it stack quietly over decades. I think that's why people give up. Not because they're reckless, because paying attention costs something too. Energy, honesty, willingness to sit with numbers that don't scream but don't lie either. Sometimes I still look away. Sometimes I don't. I haven't really figured out which one feels better yet.